Day 96 of the Trump administration, and it's all turned back to Russia again and Mike Flynn. The top Democrat and the top Republican on the House Oversight Committee say Trump's former national security advisor may have broken the law by not disclosing money he made from Russia and Turkey. How much money? From our NBC News report, quote, Flynn received $45,000 in December of 2015 to speak at a Russia TV event. He also received more than $500,000 for lobbying for the Turkish government. Both Chairman Jason Chaffetz and Ranking Member Elijah Cummings talked about Flynn with MSNBC today.
As General Flynn was required to proactively ask permission prior to engaging with Russia and Turkey. Not only was he supposed to ask for permission, he was supposed to get permission, and he didn't. And so this goes back for, a year prior to Donald Trump ever becoming the president. So it's not as if the White House isn't responding. There just aren't documents, and that's the problem.
Do you think Michael Flynn broke the law?
It doesn't appear as if he complied with the law. I don't see any evidence that he actually did comply with the law.
This is not some witch hunt. This is about a fight for the soul of our democracy. And I want to be real clear on that. What I'm trying to do is make sure that we pursue this investigation and go where the evidence leads. Our next step is to hopefully sit down with the White House and explain to them that they don't determine what we investigate as a Congress. We do.
Sean Spicer was also pressed on this today during the White House briefing.
Does the president feel that he was misled by General Flynn?
I think the president made a decision a while ago because General Flynn was not straight with the vice president at the time and let him go. I think he stands by that decision, and it's up to others to review all this information that's coming out.
But does he now feel that he also wasn't straight with him?
I don't know. A lot of the facts are still coming out, Jonathan, so I know the president made a decision a couple months ago. It was the right decision, and we've moved on, and we've continued to stay focused on.
At the time he made that decision, he said that Flynn was the victim of a media witch hunt and said he was a good man that had been a victim of this
So
witch
let's
hunt. Does he still feel
I think
that,
all the facts are still coming out on that. Let's see where they come. I think he made a decision a few months ago. He stands by that decision.
Meanwhile, on the Senate side, the Intelligence Committee Chairman Richard Burr talked to reporters on the Hill today. And while he wouldn't say whether he thinks Michael Flynn broke the law, he did discuss the issue of immunity.
Is there any way you give Flynn immunity to testify?
No.
There's no way?
No.
And do you think that you may need to subpoena him?
Anybody who has at least been associated in some way, shape, or form through news articles has either walked in the door and volunteered to testify or has publicly said they'd love to testify. So I don't see the need for any type of subpoena process.
Let's bring in tonight's panel. Juan Zarate was the Deputy National Security Advisor during the George W. Bush administration. Now he's MSNBC's Senior National Security Analyst. Former Chief of Staff at the Pentagon and the CIA, Jeremy Bash, is also an MSNBC National Security Analyst. Yahoo News anchor and a Russia expert herself, Bianna Golodryga, joins us, as does Charlie Sykes, host of NPR's Indivisible. Thank you all for being here. Juan and Jeremy and I have filled out the paperwork that you have to fill out if you are going to work in the White House and look at secret stuff. This is the form. It's really, really big. And there's a question that I want to put up on the screen because it says, do you have or have you had close and or continuing contact with a foreign national within the last 7 years? Now, there are also questions about whether you have any financial gain from any foreign power. Juan, explain to me how the White House can't produce this document that could hold open a very heavy door.
Well, I think there's some several issues, Nicole, here at play, not only with respect to General Flynn's legal liability, but also questions about what contact he was having, perhaps even on behalf of the president or the White House. And I think that's where you have some of the debate and discussion, because I think there have been requests to understand what contacts General Flynn was having on behalf of then President-elect Trump, and then also President Trump as he served as the National Security Advisor. But with respect to the form itself, I can't speak for the White House. I don't know why they aren't producing it. I'm sure they will have to at some point to the committees investigating this. And no doubt this is going to be a further subject of consideration, given the fact that that's a pretty clear question. But it could be that there was confusion on the part of General Flynn. Who knows? But at this point, the White House has to deal with...
Confusion. I filled this form out twice because I went to work in the White House and then I got married and I went back to the White House. And on my honeymoon, I went to Turkey and bought a rug. And I remember having a debate with a White House lawyer about whether that constituted any sort of contact with a foreign agent. I mean, people that work in the government take these forms deadly seriously. And you were interviewed by FBI agents afterward. How on earth, Jeremy Bash, did Michael Flynn get the needed security clearances to even be present in Donald Trump's briefings during the transition without having a current and an accurate background check form on file?
Well, Nicole, you're eminently correct. This is a huge red flag, and it's not the only time that we've had red flags regarding General Flynn. First, he failed to disclose this information on his clearance form, as you noted. He failed to disclose this work on his ethics form, his OGE 278 form. He failed to disclose his work under the Foreign Agents Registration Act on behalf of the government of Turkey. That's 3 federal forms that were either incomplete, sloppily filled out, or purposely incorrect. And then, of course, he failed to comply with the constitutional and policy requirement to go back to the Department of the Army, go back to the Pentagon, and seek permission to obtain payments from a foreign government, which every single military general officer and even people I work with have to do all the time. And so when you're 4 for 4, it really strains credulity to say he was just sloppy.
Juan, I want to get you back in on this because you have deep ties to this administration's national security officials. And I wonder if, and I know you were, I guess, an informal or formal advisor during the transition. I don't want to get that wrong. Is that right?
Formal. I was to Director Pompeo at the CIA.
So what concerns did you hear about General Flynn, if any?
Well, I don't think I can speak to anything I was hearing during that time period, Nicole. I'm sorry about that. But I think certainly there were questions about General Flynn in terms of his capacity in that role. Keep in mind he was a very successful military intelligence officer, but had not served in a policy role and certainly had not been at those levels and certainly had not worked in the White House. And so there were questions, as you read about, and certainly I think in general in the policy community, about whether or not he was ready for this role. Keep in mind as well, Nicole, and this may have something to do with the forms, he had just recently retired or been asked to leave as head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He then took on private practice and then returned back fairly quickly thereafter. It's in that period where he was engaged in all these activities that he's really gotten into trouble with, and it may be that he just was not prepared to return properly and had not checked not only all the forms properly, but had not thought through the consequences of what he would have to do to assume the role of the National Security Advisor. So I think there were questions as to whether or not he was prepared. There may be a question now as to whether or not he was preparing properly with all of his paperwork and certainly thinking through the due diligence that's required to assume this kind of a role at the highest levels of the U.S. government.
Well, this is something I heard from General Hayden as well about whether he was properly suited, whether he had the proper profile in terms of experience and temperament. But I think this goes deeper than just not filling out forms properly and not being prepared. I mean, do you think he lied on these forms?
I have no idea, Nicole. It's hard to tell. And again, I think Jeremy's right that there's a number of instances where he has avoided providing complete information, both inside the White House as well as apparently on these forms. It looks suspicious. And the problem here, of course, is perception becomes reality. Perception of whether or not he was evading, perception of whether or not there was potential collusion, perception of whether or not he was promising things to the Russian government before he had authority to do so. So all of that is problematic, regardless of whether or not he was actually intentionally evading or lying. I can't peer into his soul, and that's certainly what investigators may be looking at. But the perception here is quite damning, and that's precisely why we're having this conversation.
Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to do some soul peering in a second, but I want everyone to listen to Sean Spicer's response when he was asked today about the money Flynn got from Russian TV today.
Does the White House consider Mike Flynn's payment from Russia today to be a payment from a foreign government?
I don't know. That was, again, all of that occurred prior to his service.
Or White House. Does this White House consider a payment from Russia today to be a payment from a foreign government?
I understand. What I'm saying is everything that he did was prior to coming to this White House. So for us to determine someone else's thing as a consultant.
Today, do you consider that to be a payment from a foreign government?
I'm sorry, if what?
If someone took money from Russia today.
If they were an employee of the White House, absolutely.
Jeremy, do we have a problem here?
Yeah, I mean, Russia Today is basically Pravda. It is the state propaganda arm of the Russian Federation. And by the way, the intelligence community on January 5th, when they issued their consensus assessment that Russia had meddled in the election and favored Donald Trump, they cited Russia Today as basically the tip of the spear of the Russian attack on the U.S. democracy and our democratic system. So there's no getting around this. The broader context here is that this was collusion between the Russian government and at least one member of the Trump inner circle to get paid for this action, and then, of course, the action and the payment wasn't disclosed. So this is something that investigators will have to follow up with.
Beyond it, what's your sense of how this team is doing in terms of getting anywhere close to a place that's anywhere close to a place that allows them to turn the corner on the Russia story?
Well, now you have Flynn out of the White House, so one could ask, why not turn over whatever paperwork you've had? You've already cut ties with this person. Why not just say, here you go, he's not working for us anymore, and have at it? With the president doing what he's doing, with Sean Spicer doing what he's doing, he's leading to these types of conversations that we're having. Arguably, no one had the president's ear on foreign policy throughout this campaign and throughout the early part of this administration than Michael Flynn himself. Right. At the very least, there was a conflict of interest with areas regarding Turkey, with areas regarding Russia, with these payments. The question is, did the administration, did the president know? We also know that Michael Flynn, out of all of the other people who are part of this administration, should have known better. This is his second administration, the second one that he's been fired from as well. So we may see the president not wanting to burn bridges with him.
Charlie, let me ask you just directly. I mean, Michael Flynn was someone who made Democrats anxious for a whole lot of reasons, his temperament, his policy instincts, whatnot. But he also made Republicans uncomfortable for some of these questions that emerged very early on in the transition about possible ethics. What's your sense of the party's tolerance for this story dragging on and on?
Well, they better develop it, because it is going to drag on and on. I mean, there are a number of innocent explanations for this. None of them, in fact, are plausible at all. And the White House's refusal to be, transparent about it is, as Bianna says, is compounding the problem. Look, when he was fired, the story never really added up in the first place. The fact that he was having this conversation, that Donald Trump says, well, I would have no problem with him having that conversation, and yet he lied. Well, again, why would you lie about something that didn't break? So the question is, what did the White House know that General Flynn was up to, and when did they know it? I mean, there's something about this story as it keeps unraveling that raises more and more questions. So again, you go back to this transition, which was a challenged transition. This was probably one of the worst selections, and I think it reflects very, very poorly on Donald Trump's judgment and on the judgment of the administration.
And you see Sean Spicer now trying to distance Michael Flynn from the administration. No, he was the guy. I mean, he was the foreign policy guy. His name was floated as a possible vice presidential running mate as well. So they tried to do this with Paul Manafort. You're not going to fool us when it comes to Michael Flynn.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.